Well, hello everybody. I hope you're well and keeping safe. Please know that we are continuing to pray for you, and that if there is anything we can do to support you, then please just let us know as we continue to journey through this season together. We're going to be continuing with our series on encounters with God, or encountering God, and today in a little bit we're going to be looking at Jacob and an encounter that he had with God. But before we move on to that, just a couple of things that are coming up for you. So Sunday at 7 p.m, tonight 7 p.m, that will be our prayer time. So if you're able to join us for that, then please do. We just gather, we just meet together, and we just pray together and allow God to speak to us during that time. So please, if you're able to join us at 7 o'clock, then do that. Also coming up on Thursday at 10:30, we have our cuppa and chat time. So again, if you're able to join us for that, then please do bring along a cuppa, and we chat together, just as the title says, really. And then next Thursday coming, that same day in the evening, we're going to have our Grange Park Church quiz number 2. So please join us for that. That'll be at 8 o'clock, and I promise you this time we'll just have one straight through one session or meeting all the way through, rather than having to stop and reboot again. So but that's coming up Thursday, so that'll be at 8 o'clock in the evening. So if you can join us, please do. Please continue to remember to pray for people, to look out for people. As family together, we want to support one another and care for one another. So please look out for those who may need some help or are struggling at this time. So let's pray, shall we? Let's pray. Father God, we thank you for this time that we can have together, to meet together even though we're separate. And Lord, I just pray that you will bless this time together. Lord, I just pray that you will speak to us through your word, that it will be your voice that we hear, that, Lord, we'll just lay aside everything else that's not of you just for this time, and just seek you in all that we do. And Lord, may we receive from you now, in your name. Amen. Amen. Now, I know I said we're together, and probably would have watched this at different times anyhow, but we're still together in God, aren't we? So that's the most important thing. So the reading today comes from Book of Genesis. We're still in Genesis, but this time we're in chapter 32, verses 22 to 32.
Jacob wrestles with God. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon.
Brilliant. So we continue with our series on encountering God. As I said, today we're going to be looking at Jacob. And quite frankly, there's so much that we could look at in Jacob's life. But for today, I want us to focus on the encounter he had with God when he wrestled with him. I mean, literally wrestled with him. Now, I don't know about you, And I don't know what you know about wrestling or anything about wrestling. I have a younger son who is fanatical about wrestling, the American style, the razzmatazz and all that. And that is very skilled in many ways. It's very showmanship. It's very staged. But there is a lot of skill in those blokes and ladies actually, that they don't end up really hurting each other because they're so well timed and everything. Well, this wasn't exactly the razzmatazz of the WWF, but this was a real encounter between Jacob and God, a real physical encounter. Jacob had an interesting life, to put it mildly. We often talk about God being able to use anyone, and very often he uses people we would never think he could. Moses, David, Paul, etc., etc., and so on. All of them led troubled lives and did some things that we would never dream that having done those things, God could use them. And yet God does use them, and we know he does, and in amazing ways. And Jacob is one of them. Remember, early on, Jacob, with the help of his mother, stole the blessing from his father that was due to the elder son, who happened to be Isaac's favourite son as well. That was Esau. And this was a huge thing. Jacob had already forced Esau into giving him his birthright for some stew, because Esau was starving and he'd do anything for food. And I kind of get that, I understand that. But now he was also going to take his father's blessing off him. And the blessing would place the receiver in a special covenant with God, a special covenant relationship with God. And during this period, this period of time that we're talking about, God would often deal directly with the heads of the families, those who had received the blessing. Chapter 27 and verse 37, Isaac explains to Esau just what giving the blessing to Jacob means. He says, I have made him lord over you and made all his relatives his servants, and I have sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you, my son? He had given him practically everything that was owed and due to Esau. And the Hebrews counted this blessing given by the father to be of incredible importance. And they would consider it to be an oral contract which was just as binding to them as a written one. So Jacob had taken advantage of his brother twice, once to claim the birthright and then to claim the blessing. And in doing so, he had also deceived his father Isaac. Not the actions of someone who you would expect to be used by God in such a way that he would become a pillar of his people. And so, as you can imagine, both Esau and Isaac are not pleased with Jacob. And so his mother Rebekah tells Jacob to flee to her brother Laban, whilst Esau's fury calms down. And when it had done, she would send him word to come back. And so Jacob was set off by his father to Haran, where he would spend time with Laban, getting away from this situation that he had caused. And this becomes a really interesting part of Jacob's life, a real up and down time. As he heads to Haran, where Laban is, he has an incredible encounter with God through the dream of the stairway to heaven, where God makes an amazing promise to him for the future, for himself and his family. And part of that promise was that God would be with them always. An incredible promise to someone who had cheated the blessing out of his father and his brothers, whose it rightfully was. And so Jacob arrives in Haran, and there he encounters Laban, who in turn kind of switches the tables, turns the tables on Jacob. And Jacob ends up being deceived himself. You see, Laban had two daughters, Leah and Rachel, and Jacob wanted to marry Rachel. And so they agreed that Jacob would work for 7 years for Laban. And at the end of that time, he could then marry Rachel. So the 7 years passed and the time came for the ceremony, but Laban tricked Jacob, and actually he sent Leah to him instead. And so Jacob finally discovers this and realizes what has happened and is livid. And actually they come to another agreement whereby Laban says, well, you can have Rachel in a week's time, but only if you promise to work for another 7 years for me. And so that's what happened, but things didn't improve after that. There were rivalries between them all, one against the other and the other against the other, and it was just chaos. It was like a soap opera. It was a troubled time, to say the least, and basically based around who could have children at a particular point. And it comes to a point when Joseph has been born to Rachel, Jacob knew it was time to head back to his homeland. And it doesn't say in the scriptures, but I believe that there's this point where God nudged him and said, it's time to go back. Time to go back to your homeland, to your brother, to your family again. And so Laban and Jacob agree to split. They come up with a system. Jacob gets loads of animals. He kind of tricks Laban a bit into how he does it. But he goes off, and then Laban pursues him because he's not happy at what's happened, before they finally come to an agreement where Laban goes home and Jacob continues. And so we get to chapter 32 where we have this incredible encounter between Jacob and God. Jacob is on his way to meet his brother Esau. And this is something that he knows he has to do. He doesn't want to, he's fearful of it. But he knows that he has to. He has to try and put right what he has done wrong, to try and restore that relationship with Esau. Otherwise, how can he fully worship God? How can he fully live in that blessing that has been given to him? God has called him to go back. He has to do this. He has to do this. And actually, within this whole encounter, it kind of speaks to us of what Jesus says in Matthew 5. Verse 23 of Matthew 5 says this, therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to them. Then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. So there's this whole sense of to offer your gift fully, to offer yourself fully to God. To be immersed fully in that blessing, he has to put right what is not right at this time. Jacob knows that he's wronged his brother. He knows he needs to restore that relationship. And so that's exactly what he sets out to do. And in the build up to this encounter, he does two main things. Firstly, he plans. He devises a strategy which he hopes will work and will protect him and his family. He is fearful of meeting Esau. Remember how they left. Esau was not happy. But the other thing that he does is to pray. And it's an open, honest and wonderful prayer. Verses 9 to 12 of this chapter, he acknowledges who God is. Jacob acknowledges he's the God of everything. He notes that he's obeying God by going back to his family, going back to his homeland like God has commanded him to do. But he also acknowledges that he is not worthy of the kindness and the faithfulness that God has shown him. He's incredibly thankful for all the blessings that he's received from God. How he fled with practically nothing and now has absolute abundance due to God's goodness and faithfulness to him. And then he cries out for help. He says, please help me. Please help me, save me from the hand of my brother. And he does this thing that I think we all do. He says, because you promised me that I and my family would be huge and that we would expand. So you promised me this was happening. So you need to help me now. He was in a place of fear. But I don't think that prayer shows a lack of trust in God. Or the planning even shows a lack in trust in God. I think he turns to the one who he knows who can help him in his time of greatest need. And so having planned and prayed, he sends everyone off whilst he remains alone. And then we have this wonderful encounter. This incredible encounter with God only came around when Jacob knew himself to be exposed to a situation which was wholly beyond him. He was scared, understandably so. He had turned to prayer in his fear because he knew this was beyond him. And now, both in his desire to be alone and the form that night's struggle took, that indicates a hunger in Jacob for God himself. A hunger awakened by the crisis, but not determined by it. Jacob engages in a wrestling match, which lasted until daybreak. And Jacob absolutely refused to give up. He was determined to keep going, even though the man he was wrestling said, "Stop." And although the identity of the opponent is not fully revealed to us until after this has happened, Jacob knows that he is wrestling with God. This is an encounter with God of the most physical kind. Jacob will not give up until this man has blessed him. You see, before, Jacob had cheated the blessing, this covenant with God, out of his father. He had not earned it or even deserved it in many ways, because it was due to his brother, not him, and that was his father's choice, not Jacob's. But now there's a sense that he wants to earn it. It's almost like when he wrestles with God, he's wanting to earn it properly, to show that he was kind of worthy of it. I'm in the right place. I want to wrestle this. And he was prepared to keep going until that moment happened, despite having his hip wrenched and presumably being in an incredible amount of pain. And so God does something amazing through this struggle. Jacob's determination to keep going and not give up, he blesses him there and then. In the process, changing Jacob's name to Israel, the name given to God's people. Jacob emerged from the battle broken, renamed, and importantly, blessed. His limping would be a lasting proof that the struggle had been real. It was no dream. And there was sharp judgment in it. The new name would attest to his new standing. It was both a mark of grace, wiping out an old rebuke from his brother, and now an accolade to live up to. This blessing, or the blessing this time, was untarnished both in the taking and in the giving. It was his own, uncontrived and unmediated. Jacob had done wrong. He knew that to have his relationship fully restored, to receive that blessing in its fullness, he had to try and put that right. When Jacob and Esau met, it was an incredible encounter. The two were restored. Esau ran out to meet Jacob and embraced him. Jacob had been prepared to meet with his brother, albeit in fear, and try to right the wrong of the past, because God had commanded him to. And God's grace and love meant that the relationship was able to be restored once again. Jacob refused to stop wrestling when he was blessed, until he was blessed. When do we wrestle with God? Do we wrestle in prayer before the blessing comes? Do we really strive after God? God was the God of Abraham and Isaac. And after the battle, he was also the God of Israel. Jacob too. It was in prayer that his life changed. Jacob recognized the need for God. The situation was wholly beyond him. It was a hunger for God, as we said, that was awakened by the crisis, but not determined by it. and meeting his maker, he was transformed from his old life of shame to a new life of exaltation. Do we have the same attitude as Jacob in our lives? Are we determined to keep going in our prayer life and our walk with God? Do we keep going, or do we give up after a while? Do we lose hope? God longs to encounter us and meet with us. God longs to shape us. And sometimes that can be painful because we have to let go of stuff that's not good for our relationship with him. Stuff that maybe we've held on for a long time. But do we have a determination to keep going with that? To allow God to keep working in us? God longs to encounter us and meet with us. Do we have a determination to meet with him? To keep going, seeking him in all that we do? Amen.